All right, we're going to be looking at the story, The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, and this is written by Catherine Ann Porter. And after you look at the PowerPoint that I put online, you know that this is a woman that is definitely infatuated with death. I can't remember if I put it in the PowerPoint, but she was so infatuated with it that when she was a younger person, okay, my age, I don't know if that's really younger, but she started looking at coffins, and she ordered one out of like this magazine, and the coffin was brought in from Montana. And when it arrived, although she had sent her measurements to the person that was constructing the coffin, it was way too big for her body. So she decided to make a coffin, the coffee table in her house, and have it act as like a conversational piece. But this is a woman who also, throughout her whole life, she was constantly thinking about death, and she would think like, she would wonder, like, should I be buried? Should I be cremated? Should I be cremated and sprinkled into running water? At the end, she was cremated, and she was buried beside her mother at Indian Creek. Her story was definitely influenced by the fact that she had lost her mother, and then her grandmother is passing away about the time that this story is being written by our author. So the title is The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, and this is a story that came out or was published in 1929. Now, our main character is Ellen Weatherall, and the setting of the story is her bedroom, and we see a woman who is on her deathbed. You might have found the story a little disjointed because, first of all, she's kind of in and out of consciousness, and as we're reading the story, we're getting little bits and pieces of various memories, and some of the memories don't really make sense to the reader. And so it is kind of hard to understand. Now, the story seems like it's transpiring over this really long period of time, but we're actually just going to go through one day in the life of Ellen Weatherall, and this is going to be the day she dies. All right, so, yeah, I'm licking my finger, and we have coronavirus going around. All right, I have my book out, and I'm on page 1222. I want to read the opening scene because here she is lying on her deathbed, and the doctor has come to check on her. And I just want us to read the way Catherine Ann Porter discusses the death scene. It says, all right, Dr. Harry spread a warm paw like a cushion on her forehead where the forked green vein danced and made her eyelids twitch. Now, be a good girl, and we'll have you up in no time, said the doctor. That's no way to speak to a woman nearly 80 years old just because she's down. I'll have you respect your elders, young man. And then I'm skipping down a couple of lines. Her bones felt loose and floated around in her skin, and Dr. Harry floated like a balloon around the foot of the bed. He floated and pulled down his waistcoat and swung his glasses on a cord. Well, stay here where you are. It certainly can't hurt you. Get along. And, Doctor, you're sick, said Granny Weatherall. Leave a well woman alone. I'll call for you when I want you. Where were you 40 years ago when I pulled through milk leg and double pneumonia? You weren't even born. I'm skipping down a little bit. Her eyes closed of themselves. It was like a dark curtain drawn around the bed. The pillow rose and floated under her, as pleasant as a hammock in a light wind. Skipping down a little more. No, someone was swishing newspapers. No, Cornelia and Dr. Harry were whispering together. She leaped broad awake, thinking they whispered in her ear. She was never like this, never like this. Well, what can we expect? Yeah, she's 80 years old. All right, so she's kind of fading in and out of her like lucidity, and so we're kind of having trouble figuring out what's going on. But her thoughts are very disjointed. Now, while she's lying there, we learn that earlier in life, she thought that she was going to die. She was prepared for death, and she had gone to visit all of her children and to basically tell them goodbye. She didn't tell them, hey, I'm coming to see you to tell you goodbye. But in her mind, she thought she was about to die, and she wanted to make sure that she had said her goodbyes to her family. Now, here she is many years later. She's almost 80 years of age, and at this point, she does not realize she is on her deathbed. Instead, she's worrying about some letters that are up in the attic. I'm on page 1223. Let's see what's going on in her mind. It says, while she was rummaging around, she found death in her mind, and it felt clammy and unfamiliar. She had spent so much time preparing for her death, there was no need for bringing it up again. Let it take care of itself now. When she was 60, she had felt very old, finished, and went around making farewell trips to see her children and grandchildren with a secret in her mind. This is the very last of your mother children. Then she made her will and came down with a long fever. That was all just a notion like a lot of other things, but it was lucky too, for she had once for all got over the idea of dying for a long time. Now she couldn't be worried. She hoped she had better sense now. All right. And then I can't find the part where she's thinking about. Anyway, she's thinking about these letters that George has written her. I found it, 1223 at the top. The box in the attic with all those letters tied up. Well, she'd have to go through that tomorrow. All those letters, George's letters and John's letters and her letters to them both, lying around for the children to find afterwards, made her uneasy. Yes, that would be tomorrow's business. No use to let them know about how silly she had once been. All right, so she had married John. George had been her fiance that did not show up at the wedding. Bum, bum, bum. All right, so I think her name, Weatherall, suits her extremely well. If I was in class right now, I would ask you, what kind of things did she weather? Since we're not in class, you're going to have to listen to me read these excerpts. Bless your heart. All right, so I'm going to start with 1224. Here's one thing she weathered. It said it seemed strange that there was something wrong in the idea. Why, he couldn't possibly recognize her. And I'm on 1224 if I didn't already say that. She had fenced in 100 acres once, digging the post holes herself and clamping the wires with just a Negro boy to help. That changed a woman. John would be looking for a young woman with a peaked Spanish comb in her hair and the painted fan. Digging post holes changed a woman. Riding country roads in the winter with women and their babies was another thing. Sitting up nights with sick horses and sick Negroes and sick children and hardly ever losing one. John, I had hardly ever lost one of them. John would see that in a minute, and that would be something he could understand. She wouldn't have to explain anything. All right, so that's one thing she had to weather. All right, 1225. Here's another thing she had to weather. I'm toward the bottom. It was Hapsy she really wanted. She had to go a long way back through a great many rooms to find Hapsy, standing with a baby on her arm. She seemed herself to be Hapsy also, and the baby on Hapsy's arm was Hapsy, and himself and herself all at once, and there was no surprise in the meeting. Then Hapsy melted from within and turned flimsy as gray gauze, and the baby was a gauzy shadow, and Hapsy came up close and said, "I thought you'd never come. You haven't changed a bit." All right, so this is a very unclear part of the story, but it appears that she has lost a child early on. There's one other thing that she weathered, and I think this is kind of the pivotal point of the story, and this is the jilting. What does jilting mean? It means to be stood up. Stood up at the altar. Have any of you had friends who planned for a wedding? You know how much planning it goes into a wedding, finding the dress and the bridesmaids and your gifts and getting the cake and putting all that money toward the wedding, and then to have the groom not show. So you can kind of put yourself in her shoes to understand what she was going through. Bottom of 1224. Here's the big scene. Dun, dun, dun. It says, what does a woman do when she has put on the white veil and set out the white cake for a man and he doesn't come? She tried to remember. No, I swear, he never did me any harm, but in that. He never harmed me, but in that. And what if he did? There was the day, but a whirl of dark smoke rose and covered it, crept up and over into the bright fields where everything was planted so carefully in orderly rows. That was hell. She knew hell when she saw it. For 60 years she had prayed against remembering him and against losing her soul in the deep pit of hell. And now the two things were mingled in one, and the thought of him was a smoky cloud from hell that moved and crept in her head when she had just got rid of the Dr. Harry and was trying to rest a minute. All right, so you're going to notice as she's talking about her family and her happy memories, there's a lot of lights and white. The color white is mentioned. When she's dealing with her death or remembering back to George standing her up at the altar, you're going to see dark and blackness. All right. So as the story progresses, we can see that she's a woman that has been really injured by this jilting. And so she has tried to be a strong, independent woman to make up for that. Now, she's very religious. She's a Catholic. She goes to communion. She takes wine to people at her church. But we see that she holds a grudge against George, who stood her up at the altar. I love this part of the story where she wishes she could just get her hands on George. She has one more thing she'd like to say. 12:25, yep, I'm going to read it. It says she changed her mind after 60 years, and she would like to see George. I want you to find George. Find him and be sure to tell him I forgot him. I want him to know I had my husband just the same, and my children, and my house like any other woman. A good house, too, and a good husband that I loved, and fine children out of him. Better than I hoped for, even. Tell him I was giving back everything he took away and more. Oh, no, God, no. There was something else besides the house and the man and the children. Oh, surely they were not all. What was it? Something not given back. All right, so she's holding a grudge due to his jilting. So at the end of the story, starting on 12:27, she is in the last few minutes of her life, and they have called in Father Conley from the church, and he is drawing a cross on the bottom of her foot and performing the last rite. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know a whole lot about that, but I know that he's getting her ready for death. And she thinks that the priest is flirting with her when he's drawing the cross on the bottom of her, or the sole of her foot. All right, so at the very end, she is about to die. There is a footnote reference. It said to read Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. And I want to do that, and then let's kind of apply this biblical story to what's going on at the end of this. All right, got my Bible ready. All right, so I'm in Matthew 25. I am going to read it. Then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were smart and prudent. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the prudent took oil in flask along with their lamps. Now while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight there was a shout, Behold the bridegroom! Come out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the smart, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the smart answered, saying, No, there will not be enough for us, and you too. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourself. But while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. And later the other 5 virgins came and saying, Lord, Lord, open up for us. But he answered and said, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. So this Bible story, this parable, is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. But it's talking about how the church is is Christ's bride, and Christ is going to come at some just random time. We don't know when that's going to happen, but we have to be prepared for it. And basically, the 5 virgins that had their oil, they were the saved or Christians, and the 5 that didn't have their oil were those that maybe knew about Christ but didn't know him personally. So at the end of the story, let's just read the ending and then talk. Her heart sank down and down. There was no bottom to death. She couldn't come to the end of it. The blue light from Cornelia's, that's her daughter's, lampshade drew into a tiny point in the center of her brain. It flickered and winked like an eye. Quietly it fluttered and dwindled. Granny lay curled down within herself, amazed and watchful, staring at the point of light that was herself. Her body was now only a deeper mass of shadows in an endless darkness, and this darkness would curl around the light and swallow it up. God, give a sign. For the second time, there was no sign. Again, no bridegroom, and the priest was in the house. She could not remember any other sorrow because this grief wiped them all away. Oh no, there's nothing more cruel than this. I'll never forgive it. She stretched herself with a deep breath and blew out the light. So she's calling herself the bride of Christ, and Christ is the bridegroom. Now, back in Jesus' time, they would be betrothed for a year, and the groom, this is biblical times, the groom would leave for a solid year and go and prepare a place for his wife, a home for her. And then after a year, he would sneak back into town. She would not know he was coming. There would be a trumpet that was played, and then she would use that lamp to light the way for the bridegroom to find her. So in this story, there's that mention of the bridegroom. It's referring to Christ. The priest is in the house. Her priest, Father Conley's there doing the last rite. She's there. But this time the bridegroom doesn't show up. So in this story, the jilting of Granny Weatherall, you might be thinking, oh, there's just one jilting. No, there's two jiltings. God did not show up for her when she died. Why? Well, in the